We're back. I'm always happy to say, joined by one of the most distinguished diplomats I have had the privilege of knowing personally. His name is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. He represented his native Israel in the United States in a number of capacities, including as the counselor for congressional affairs with the rank of ambassador in Israel's embassy in Washington. He has been one of the closest observers, students, and analysts of developments in the Middle East for decades. He writes the Ettinger Report, which is a marvelous online resource, and he's kind enough to visit with us from time to time to give us updates as to what is happening in Israel and in the region that should be of interest to all of us concerned, of course, about the state of Israel, the Jewish state, but also our vital interests as Americans in that dangerous part of the world. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Securing America. It's always good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you. It's my privilege. Thank you.
We've been seeing an uptick in what is often called the cycle of violence. You have a rather more clear eyed view of what is actually going on. Tell us about it and its implications as you see them at the moment.
Well, in fact, it has been intrinsic, systemic Arab terrorism west of the Jordan River, uh, afflicting the Jewish state. In fact, it has been around for over 100 years, namely before there was the modern day Jewish state, which was born in 1948. It has been around before 1967 when we reunited Jerusalem and returned to Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. It's terrorism driven by a fanatic vision, which on one hand is religious, Islamic, namely, they firmly believe that there's no room for a so called infidel Jewish state in what they call the abode of Islam. And at the same time, it's also nationalistic terrorism by Arabs who believe that there should not be Jewish state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. The current wave of terrorism, which again is driven by that annihilationist vision, to a large extent, the current wave is driven by hate education. The school curriculum, which was established back in 1993 through the Oslo Accord, which allowed some 100 terrorists headed by Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas to come to the heartland of the land of Israel, to Samaria, Judea, Gaza, parts of Jerusalem. In this school system, they teach K through 12 the art of anti Jewish terrorism. They teach them that martyrdom would get them to heaven with some 70 virgins. They pay annual monthly allowances to families of terrorism. They herald terrorism by public processions, by public monuments, naming schools after suicidal terrorists. And there is
So,
also
Mr. Ambassador, this is all, I guess, to be lumped together as incitement by the authorities of the so called Palestinian Authority. They are engaged in it both from Gaza, where Hamas rules, as well as where Fatah is at least nominally in charge. I wondered to what extent has this incitement, has this belief that violence will be rewarded been intensified of late by the behavior of the US government, the Biden administration's policies of sort of breathing new life into the aspirations of the Palestinians after I think they were considerably dampened down by the previous administration of Donald Trump.
Well, there's no doubt, as suggested by history, by track record of combating terrorism, the more concessions, the more appeasement, the more favoritism you demonstrate towards terrorists, the more you whet their appetite and the more you embolden them. And certainly, the current administration in Washington, by insisting that there should be an American consulate in Jerusalem in charge of Palestinian affairs, which is a nice name for an American embassy to so-called state of Palestine, has further emboldened the Palestinians. When it comes to the crux of the problem for Americans, it's very sad that American policymakers don't realize that a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River would doom the pro US Hashemite regime east of the river and then creating ripple effects into the Arabian Peninsula, haunting, toppling the pro American regimes in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Oman, eventually also in pro US Egypt. And instead of realizing that Israel's control of that area not only is it a direct extension of the cradle of Judaism, the cradle of Jewish history, Jewish religion, Jewish language, but it also serves America's interest because Israel on the mountain ridges of Judea Samaria bolsters Israel's posture of deterrence, which deters terrorism, which minimizes instabilities, which minimizes number of wars. And the opposite is also true. A Palestinian state in Judea Samaria, as espoused by Secretary Tony Blinken, by National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, this is the prescription for instability in the Middle East, for toppling pro-US Arab regime, and heyday, quite a bonanza for Russia, for China, and for the Ayatollahs of Iran.
I want to ask you about Iran specifically. At the same time this is going on, essentially playing with fire in a tinderbox of the Middle East, we have the administration simultaneously pursuing, with of all people, the Russians' help, this will o' the wisp idea of a new nuclear deal with those Ayatollahs. Mr. Ambassador, based on everything you've studied and seen and contended with over all these years, I know you don't believe for a moment that there's a chance that this will actually prevent the Ayatollahs from getting the bomb that they've aspired to for so long. In fact, it may actually wind up financing it the way this deal is being set up. But at this point in time, does the various elements of do the various elements of the Middle East that you've just described that are aligned against Iran and have been aligned with us now see this as getting to be the moment of truth, whereby if they don't act in concert immediately, they will confront a nuclear armed Iran and the United States will be on side with it.
Well, it's not only the potential demise of every single pro-American Arab Sunni regime, which has the machete of the Ayatollahs of Iran at their throat, it's also the U.S. While the U.S. is courting Iran in the Persian Gulf, the Ayatollahs of Iran are busy entrenching themselves in America's own backyard, south of the border with Mexico. You have re-entrenchment, collaboration between the Ayatollahs of Iran and every single anti American, staunchly anti American Latin American government. You have the Iranians in Venezuela mining uranium. You have the Ayatollahs in Iran, in Cuba, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, busy exporting Predator unmanned aerial vehicles, which could very well be employed against targets on the US mainland. You have the Ayatollahs of Iran collaborating with the cartels, with the biggest, largest cartels, drug cartels in Mexico, Colombia, and Bolivia training terrorists over there, laundering money to the extent of mega billion dollars, which assists the Iranians in getting their hand on more advanced ballistic capabilities and nuclear capabilities, while at the same time undermining America's posture at what they call America's soft underbelly, namely Latin America, and again, all the way to the US Mexico border.
Yeah, and as you said, they're not the only ones operating in, well, what I think of as our front yard, not so much our backyard, south of our border. It's their allies, the Chinese and the Russians, not least, doing the same. But I think you made the point very compellingly, Mr. Ambassador, that this problem with Iran is not simply Israel's problem or even the broader pro American Middle East's problem. This is a problem very much for us here at home as well. And we continue to neglect this at our extreme peril. I believe, as I know you do, this is a moment for the United States to stand with as Israel and such other friends as it has in that region for our own mutual as well as collective interests. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us with this update. Your insights, as I say, are invaluable, and I appreciate what you do with the Ettinger report and recommend it to all of our listeners. Come back to us with updates, if you will,
Thank you.
sir, in the future. This is a volatile area, as always, and very much in need of your attention and ours. Thanks. Next up, we'll speak with Kyle Scheidler about more on that border problem here, right after this.